guys. This is Jenna Burt, host of the Confessions of a Military Spouse podcast. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hey, this is Lee.
And this is Chelsea.
And we are the host of your new favorite sales podcast, See Jane Sell.
Join us every Thursday for a new episode where we will tackle the realistic world of sales and maybe teach you a thing or two along the way.
You can subscribe to See Jane Sell on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, CastBox, and Spotify. Thanks, and enjoy the following podcast on Public House Media.
The Leadership Show, the place where leaders learn more about themselves and how they can shift the way they lead. Because when leaders get better, families get better, communities get better, and the world gets better. And now your host, Chief Leadership Officer of Shepherd Revolution, David Prosper.
If this is your first time listening to the Leadership Show, we want to personally welcome you. We started this podcast because too many of us have been hurt, underappreciated, and abused by unhealthy leaders. We believe that when leaders get better, families get better, communities get better, our workplace get better, and ultimately the world gets better. Now, there are two kinds of leaders in our world. Leaders who command and leaders who connect. Two kinds. I believe that once we start using the information that we learn, we can start applying it into our life, then we start receiving that transformation. It's a beautiful thing. Our shows are intentionally created to be under 30 minutes for working professionals, busy parents, mom and dads. This is for you, on-the-go students, and aspiring leaders, those who want to be a leader and what that looks like. But before we get into our show, we're going to go into our verse of the day. Now, I believe that the Bible is the foundation of all leadership. And we can find the scripture in Proverbs 28, verse 16. Abusive leaders fail to employ wisdom, but leaders who despise corruption will enjoy a long and full life. What that reminds me of was my mother. She would always say, a hard head leads to a soft bottom. In other words, if I didn't use her teaching, I would get disciplined. And it's applying that wisdom. And what that means to me is being humble, being receptive versus defensive. Oftentimes when people are trying to look out for us and say something that disagree with them or an area of growth, our natural tendency, my natural tendency is sometimes like, who are you not to tell me that I'm perfect? And oftentimes that pride leads us to that destruction. But when we're wise, it leads us to a long and full life. Again, Proverbs 28, verse 16. Abusive leaders fail to employ wisdom, but leaders who despise corruption will live a long and full life. Today, we're going to be kicking off our very new leadership series. Yes, leadership is everything. John Maxwell talks about everything rises and falls on leadership. Now, my question to you, I want you to think about this. Are you experiencing a leader in your life that is using their power over you? Now, if you're experiencing that, you've come to the right show, because today we're going to be discussing some major problems it creates and tools that you can use to combat it. We're not just going to talk about what's the problem. We're going to talk about how we can combat it and overcome it. Now, if you're experiencing that, this type of leader who uses their power over you, that's called a dictator type of leader. This might be a cuss word for some of you all. It's a dictator. And some of the behaviors that you'll start to notice is that this leader is aggressive. They give orders, follow them, follow me. They push you hard. There's no room for creativity. It's very intense, and you feel like you're walking on eggshells, that every move you have to make has to be perfect or you're going to be judged. There's no loyalty, but they require loyalty. It's like, you follow me, and they would use mechanics and manipulation for you to follow them. But there's no loyalty for them to follow you. There's no team building, no teamwork. And these are the leaders that typically do less work or no work at all, but take all the credit. So let's look at some historical examples, because if we don't honor the past, we're bound to repeat it. And we're going to look at Adolf Hitler and his style of leadership for an example. Now, he was a dictator type of leader who rose into power very quickly. People feared him. He was actually the mastermind behind the World War II and the mass systematic extermination of millions and millions of Jews. But what led him to lead from a place of dictatorship? Because he wasn't born that way. Hitler joined the army in 1914, and he was injured in war twice. This drove him to feel powerless, and he was enraged after they were defeated. He was in a position of powerlessness, and after he recovered, he was convinced that fate picked him to rescue this disgraced nation. So let's dive in deeper. He felt powerless, and he felt that he was picked to rescue this disgraced nation. Our behaviors and actions are what happens at the surface level. So think of a plant, right? We don't see the roots down beneath, but we see the fruits above the surface. So what's been creating and fostering and nurturing is a mindset of powerlessness. And that's what he felt. He was responding from places of wounds. And there's a quote that says, leaders who have not healed from their hurt bleed on people who've never cut them. So in order to produce good fruits as a leader, we have to focus on our roots as a leader. I'll say that again. For in order for us to work on the fruits as a leader, we have to focus on the roots. So going down deep inside, and I'm going to get very vulnerable and personal. I am on a journey right now of healing, and it's uncomfortable. It's painful. And as I'm reading these books about trauma and wound, I thought I was good. But when I started reading these books, it's been telling me that there's areas in my life that I haven't healed from, being abandoned, being neglected, being abused. And oftentimes, if we're not digging deep and finding out what's bothering us, what's the barriers, it leads us to a place where we bleed on people who didn't cut us. And those people are our friends, our family, and so forth. And I assume that Hitler didn't deal with his wounds. And that's what led him to those places where he would bleed on the people who didn't cut them, like the Jews. Now, I just want to be honest. Pain is a part of life. Everyone is going to face pain. That's inevitable. But how we cope with it affects how we lead. And that's important. What are our coping mechanisms when we're upset? What do? Do we find time to either meditate or to breathe or to relax? Or do we vent on people who haven't affected us? So we have to learn coping mechanism to deal with stress and pain. Now, there's research that suggested that Hitler suffered from a number of health issues. You know, Parkinson's disease, syphilis, irritable bowel syndrome. So he was in pain inside, and he didn't release any of that. So again, he was bleeding on people who never hurt him. So let's recap what we just talked about. We discussed the influences of leaders like Hitler, who leads from a place of dictator. Think of it this way, right? Let's make it more practical. For those who have lawns, think about putting sprinklers in your lawn and there's a dog barking at you, just barking at you constantly. And you feel that intense feeling. You feel that fear. How likely will you be, or how motivated or inspired would you be to plant more sprinklers? Because you know every time you go out, you're going to get barked at. That's what dictator leaders are. They're the dogs that bark. Now, let's talk about the effects what a dictator leader actually does to the people that they serve or the people that they lord over. You may be saying to yourself, I'm not like Hitler. This example is so far-fetched. But let's make it more practical. According to Forbes, poor leadership is costing America $360 billion a year in lost productivity. That's $360 billion. That's a B. That is a lot of money. So it is affecting everyone and anyone. So again, according to the American Psychological Association, 40 to 50% of people are getting divorced, and that number isn't going down. So if you think that dictator styles of leadership is not affecting you, it's affecting everyone, families, businesses, everyone. Now, I used to work in retail, and my manager at that time, he was a dictator type of leader. And he would come in, and his manager was the same way. They would come in, and we would have our monthly goals, our weekly goal, or our daily goals. And there were times that he would compare us to other stores. And I would share, our customers are very different. But his response was, do as I say. And it was very cookie cutter. And his mantra was, silence is compliance. And in that, I felt insecure. I felt that I didn't have a voice. I felt that I was just a number. But what really changed for me was how it impacted my family, my wife, my kids. They would see the residual of that anger, that frustration, that insecurity, because we tend to mimic the leaders who we follow. So he was leading from that place of a dictator. So when I went home, I would lead from that place of being a dictator. And it was subconsciously. I didn't think about it. It just happened because I was around him a lot. So when I came home, I became a dictator. And my wife was just like, who died and made you Lord? And she would check me all the time. But what it brought back to me was that verse in Proverbs 28, verse 16. Being wise means being checked, being humbled, and then I can have a long and full life. So that changed in me, and I was no longer following him because I can't follow a leader who's a dictator because I want to flourish. I want to be my true self without limitation. So I'm not telling anyone to quit their job and, just like, I'm not following this leader anymore. No, I'm not telling you that, but to be more mindful of who you're following. And when you're doing an interview process, asking them, hey, what's your style of leadership? How do you have an open door? Can I give you feedback just like you give me feedback? And let's make it even more relational. When you're getting into a relationship, ask that person you're dating, what's your style of leadership? Are you as a do as I say or let's do this together type of leader? So here are some practical steps that we can start taking to improve our leadership style. If this is your leadership style, I'm not here to condemn you at all. I'm not here. That's not my job. My hope is that the truth that I share and the truth that we all share is we are aware of what's going on and that we improve, we take those steps. And here are some steps that we can start taking to improve our leadership style if we're leading from that place of dictator. Look for the lessons. Number one is look for the lessons and not the pain in your hurt. Now, this can be one of the hardest things because when we're in pain, we feel it. And our thought reminds us of that feeling. So it's this cycle of I feel the pain. Our brain tells us we feel the pain and remember the memory that happens. And we're constantly in that cycle of pain. But how do we break up that pattern is shifting that thought. And it's difficult, but when we master it, it's a beautiful thing. It's saying, what did I learn from this? What did I learn from this? And when we start to see the lessons, we start to look at the pain differently and we become more grateful that it's happened. It's like, okay, I'm grateful that it's happened because it's taught me this versus it's been painful and it hurts and I am hurt. So I go around and tell everybody I'm hurt. We post on social media how much I'm hurt. Today I'm hurt. Tomorrow I'm hurt. I'm just hurt, right? We make a song out of it. So look for the lessons and not the pain in your hurt. Number 2, don't bottle up the hurt. Share your truth. Share your pain with trusted friends. I was telling my son when he was struggling with, his father being away, and he was struggling with his emotions. He was physically hurting, and I saw the pain on him physically. He had a knot in his stomach from just harboring all of that. And then when we started to talk about what was going on in his world, started to name those things, he started to share his truth. That knot went away. The physical knot in his stomach of the pain and the anxiety went away. And if you're a visual person, I'm talking through the audio. So if you're a visual person, think about this. Think about a Sprite bottle. And if you shake it up long enough, what's going to happen? It's going to burst, especially if you open it too soon. And that is what happens when we bottle up our hurt inside. We explode. The smallest things in our life makes us explode. And the people around just like, yo, what was going on? Becky wasn't like this before, right? Becky wasn't like this before because she was bottling up all of her stuff inside. But when we release it in a healthy way, I'm not telling you to go on social media and go blasting and like, this sucks and that sucks and everything sucks. There's a healthy way to communicate our hurt. It's saying, hey, this situation happened in my life. This hurt me. This is how I feel. That's healthy versus the other way. That's number 2. Number 3 is forgive yourself and the person that hurt you. Forgive yourself and the person that hurt you. This is one of the hardest things to do because it requires us to look inside. And we live in a culture as leaders, as sons, brothers, as people. We always look externally. I was reading this book and it said we actually don't see ourselves. We see a reflection of ourselves in the mirror. But when we start to look inside, that's when we start to see ourselves. So forgiving ourselves first and the person that hurt us requires us to say, hey, I'm releasing this. It requires us to say, hey, I'm going to separate the problem from the person. And when we can separate the problem from the person, we can still love that person. We can look at the problem and then we can find a solution for that problem so that problem is not reoccurring. That is how we forgive ourselves and forgive the person that hurt us. And the thing about forgiveness, it's not an achievement. It's not like when I walked up on Manitou Incline and reached the top and I was like, yes, I've achieved it. I have arrived. I'm Mr. Forgiving. No, it's a process. It constantly happens because the thing about the brain, we have memories and things trigger us to think about those things that hurt us. So when those memories come back up as a leader, you have to choose and decide to forgive. Decide to forgive. And it's going to change the way you lead. Number 4, remove the victim mindset. This is one of the most powerful. All of them are powerful, but this one allows you to do those other things. That victim mentality is woe is me. Life is happening to me. I can't catch a break. I grew up in for me, I'm African American, and the stories that I hear is, the man is trying to keep me down and I can't move forward and my community sucks. My environment sucks. My education sucks. These things may be true, but we have to decide again that we're going to take responsibility. How am I contributing to this problem? That's a question we have to ask. And what happens when we move from a victim mentality to an owner mentality, we start to take responsibility, right? I'll say that again. Once we start moving from that victim mentality to an owner's mentality, we start to take responsibility for our actions and what we contribute. Number 5, set boundaries for the future. This is like guardrails. For those who drive on a highway, if you're driving in a highway right now, I want you to look at the guardrails. I don't want you to be texting on the phone right now. These guardrails create safety for us, just like the traffic signals create safety. If we didn't have these guardrails and these boundaries, our lives there would be a lot more accidents. It would be anarchy. And then there's some millennials out there. I'm a millennial. We typically say, YOLO, you only live once. Let's push the boundaries. Let's push the boundaries. But the boundaries are there to keep us safe. So set boundaries in the future for your relationships. Number 6, remove the pain triggers. Remove the pain triggers. We have to, again, look inside. What triggers me to do the things that I do? For the longest time, again, I want to be vulnerable. When I would go out and drink with my friends, that would trigger me to be more aggressive. When I would drink, I would be more aggressive. So I know that this environment, when I would go out with my friends and I would go drinking, it would trigger me to be more aggressive to the people around me. So what did I have to do? I had to say, no, hey, I'm not going out. I'm not drinking. That's not what I'm doing. My friends are like, oh, you could just have one drink. One drink leads to 10 drinks. Before you know it, you're crawling on the floor. That's what bar crawl is. You're crawling on the floor. But that was triggered me. So we have to understand what triggers us and remove those triggers so we're not constantly being triggered in our lives. So the 6 things that you can do to improve your leadership style if you are a dictator type of leader. Look for the lessons in life and not the pain, number 1. Number 2, don't bottle up the hurt. Share your truth with trusted friends. Find some good friends. Number 3, forgive yourself and the person that hurt you. Number 4, remove the victim mindset. Remove it. You're done with it. Just like you remove the baby shoes that you grew up with, remove that victim mindset. Number 5, set boundaries in the future. And last but not least, number 6, remove the pain triggers. Now, I want to talk about next time when we come back. I want you to be asking yourself, are you experiencing a leader who uses negative reinforcement to motivate you? There are both advantages and disadvantages to this style of leadership. We're going to be breaking this down even further so that you're aware and empowered. We want you to know what's going on so you're equipped, so you do not want to miss next time. You can find us on Spreaker. You can find us on Spotify. Anywhere there's podcasts, you can find us. And I want you to remember, when you're a leader, set yourself apart and lead from the heart.
Thank you for joining us here at the Leadership Show. If you'd like access to additional resources and insight, text Leadership to 345-345 or visit theleadershipshow.com. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please let us know and spread the word by giving us a review on iTunes. You can listen to our show on iTunes, Success Radio, Spotify, Google Play, and the IB Network on Spreaker.com. If you have a question for David, send it our way at prosper@shepherdrevolution.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time here on the Leadership Show.